The sun had barely risen when Mr. Dalton stepped out onto his porch with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and his old radio playing softly behind him. The early mist rolled across the hills like a moving blanket, and the scent of dew and pine filled the air. It was the kind of morning he loved, quiet, still, and undisturbed. But that peace didn't last long. At first, it was faint, a sharp, broken bark that came from somewhere beyond the tall grass near his eastern fence line. Mr. Dalton paused, squinting into the morning haze. He heard it again, louder this time, panicked. Not a coyote, not one of his own dogs either. This was different. It wasn't wild, it wasn't routine, and it wasn't going away. He set his coffee down and reached for his coat. His boots thudded against the porch steps as he moved fast toward the sound. The barking was constant now, high-pitched and strained. Whatever animal it wasn't just making noise. It was crying. Pushing through the tall weeds near the fence, Mr. Dalton suddenly stopped in his tracks. There, caught in the twisted metal of a barbed wire fence, was a German shepherd. She was hanging awkwardly, one of her back legs snagged in the wire. Her body dangled painfully, her front paws barely touching the ground. Her belly was swollen, unmistakably pregnant. She looked at him with wide, golden-brown eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. "Oh no, girl, what happened to you?" Mr. Dalton whispered, already reaching for his phone. The dog tried to move when she saw him, but the effort only made the wire dig deeper. She let out a whimper that sounded like a plea. Mr. Dalton didn't have the tools to get her down safely. He quickly dialed the local animal rescue, his voice tight with urgency. "This is Walter Dalton. There's a dog in trouble on my fence line. Pregnant, caught in barbed wire. She's been out here a while. You'd better hurry." They promised to come immediately. He stayed with her while he waited, crouching nearby, speaking in a low, steady tone. "You're not alone, girl. Help's coming. Just hang on." For a moment, the dog stopped whimpering. Her breathing slowed, and her eyes softened just a bit. It was as if she understood. By the time the rescue team's white van pulled up on the dirt road, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the fence line. Mr. Dalton waved them over, standing protectively near the German shepherd as if shielding her from the world. 3 people stepped out, each carrying supplies: gloves, bolt cutters, gauze, and blankets. One of them, a young woman named Tara, knelt down the moment she saw the dog. Her expression shifted from concern to heartbreak in seconds. "Oh no, she's pregnant," Tara said gently, her voice calm but firm. "We need to be very careful." The shepherd whimpered again as they approached, though her eyes never left Mr. Dalton's. There was something in her gaze, not just pain, but trust. Despite her suffering, she seemed to know these humans meant no harm. Tara and her team worked quickly but carefully. First, they secured her front legs to keep her from struggling and injuring herself further. Then they examined the twisted barbed wire cutting into her leg. It had wrapped around tightly, and her fur was matted with dry blood. But the wound, while painful, wasn't deep enough to threaten her life. "We can do this," Tara nodded. "Just breathe, girl. You're going to be okay." With one smooth motion, the bolt cutters snapped the wire, freeing her leg. The dog collapsed onto the blanket they laid below her, too weak to stand, but no longer suspended in pain. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She just let out a quiet, trembling breath, a sound so soft and fragile it made Mr. Dalton swallow hard. They gently lifted her into the van, placing her on a padded bed. Tara stayed beside her, checking her pulse and speaking in soft words of comfort. "She's a fighter," Tara said, looking at Mr. Dalton. "If she made it through this, and carrying puppies on top of it, she's got more strength than most." Mr. Dalton nodded, removing his hat. "Name her Grace," he said quietly, "because that's what she's got." Tara smiled. "Grace it is." As the van door closed and the vehicle began to drive away, Mr. Dalton stood alone by the broken fence. The morning had started in silence, but it ended with something far more powerful, a life saved, and a spark of hope that had somehow survived the wire. Grace was taken straight to the animal shelter. a small but dedicated facility on the outskirts of town. The building was humble, but the staff were nothing short of compassionate. Tara, the young rescuer, helped carry Grace inside. She looked fragile, her breathing shallow, but there was a quiet resilience in her eyes. The shelter's vet, Dr. Harris, immediately began examining her. Grace lay still, her head resting on the soft bedding, her large brown eyes blinking slowly as the medical team worked around her. The quiet beeping of the heart monitor and the soft shuffle of footsteps filled the room as Dr. Harris moved with focused precision. "She's exhausted," he murmured, glancing up at Tara. "She must have been hanging there for hours. I'll need to give her fluids, check for internal injuries, and we can't forget about the puppies." Tara nodded, her heart heavy. "She's carrying 6, right? I can feel them moving." Dr. Harris nodded as well. "They're likely just fine, but we'll have to monitor her closely. We'll do everything we can." Despite the urgency in the air, there was something almost peaceful about the way Grace rested. She was no longer hanging from that brutal wire, no longer in pain. The shelter's warmth surrounded her, and for the first time in what could have been days, she was safe. Tara stayed with her, never leaving her side, offering soft words of encouragement. "You're going to be all right, Grace. We're going to help you, okay?" Hours passed, and after some careful treatment, Dr. Harris confirmed Grace's condition was stable. The vet was cautiously optimistic, but knew the next few days were critical. "She's a fighter," Dr. Harris said as he cleaned his hands. "I've seen animals give up in far less dire situations. But this girl, she's strong. She's got a will to live." Tara smiled softly, stroking Grace's fur. "She's not just strong. She's got something more than that." Late that evening, after all the treatments, Grace finally closed her eyes for a proper rest. Tara made sure she was comfortable, tucking the blanket around her. A small lamp cast a warm glow over the room, and in the soft silence, Tara could almost hear the quiet rhythm of Grace's breath. As she stood to leave, Tara whispered, "Rest easy, girl. Tomorrow is a new day." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Grace allowed herself to sleep, knowing she was no longer alone in the world. The following morning, the shelter was buzzing with activity. Volunteers and staff were in motion, caring for other animals, but the focus was largely on Grace. She had spent the night resting, her breathing steady but deep. Tara, who had stayed with her until the last possible moment the evening before, returned early to check on her. As she walked into the quiet room, she smiled at the sight of Grace, still curled on the soft bedding, looking more at ease than she had the night before. Tara knelt beside her, gently running her hand over the dog's back. "Good morning, Grace," Tara whispered. The German shepherd's tail flicked once in response, and her eyes opened slowly, locking with Tara's. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, the kind that spoke of gratitude and understanding. Grace had been through so much, yet there was a quiet trust in her eyes now, a soft surrender to the shelter's care. Tara stood up and motioned to a nearby volunteer. "We'll need to take her vitals again. I'm worried about her blood pressure. I'll get the vet in here too." Within an hour, Dr. Harris was back at Grace's side. He was pleased with her progress, though he remained cautious. "She's doing better than I expected," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "The fluid therapy helped a lot, but we'll need to continue monitoring her closely." Tara nodded. "What about the puppies? How soon do you think they'll be coming?" Dr. Harris checked Grace again, gently palpating her abdomen. "It's hard to say, but I guess within the next 48 hours. We should be prepared." The shelter staff began to make preparations. Blankets, towels, warm water bottles. Everything they could need for the birth was ready. Grace's due date had clearly arrived, and while her past had been traumatic, the shelter was now her sanctuary. As the hours passed, Grace's condition continued to stabilize. Her appetite returned in small amounts, and she drank water more eagerly than she had the day before. Tara brought her a bowl of soft food, and Grace devoured it quickly, her ribs no longer as visible as they had been just the day before. The vet gave her a clean bill of health for the time being and recommended rest. But Tara was certain of one thing. Grace wasn't just healing physically. Something inside her, something unspoken, was shifting. Grace had made it through the worst, and now she was on the path to something better. For the first time in what felt like forever, Grace had a chance, a real chance, at a future. "Don't worry, girl," Tara murmured, brushing a stray lock of fur from Grace's face. "You're safe now, and we're going to get through this together." 2 days later, the shelter was filled with a mixture of anxious anticipation and quiet excitement. Grace's labor had started during the early hours of the morning, her body trembling slightly as the first puppy was born. Tara had been by her side through the entire process, offering soft words of encouragement as Grace labored, her breathing slow but steady. The first few puppies came quickly, healthy and strong, each one wriggling into the world with a loud cry, eager for their mother's warmth. Tara smiled with relief, but as Grace began to settle, Tara noticed something unusual. The last puppy was struggling. Grace's contractions grew weaker, and Tara's heart sank when she saw the small, fragile form of the runt. This tiny puppy was far smaller than the others, its body limp and barely moving. Grace, already exhausted from the strain of her labor, looked down at the small pup with a mix of confusion and concern. Tara gently picked up the runt, cradling him in her palm. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "We're going to help you." The tiny puppy made a weak squeak, but his eyes barely fluttered open. His fur was thin, his body delicate, and Tara feared the worst. But there was something in his gaze, something that tugged at her heart. Despite his fragility, there was a quiet determination in his tiny frame. She placed him next to Grace, who immediately turned her head and began to lick him gently, coaxing him toward her warmth. Tara watched in awe as the runt, his tiny body trembling, struggled to move closer to his mother. To her surprise, Grace, despite her own exhaustion, stayed by his side. She nudged him carefully with her nose, encouraging him to nurse. He made several weak attempts, his tiny mouth fumbling for his mother's teeth, but Grace never gave up on him. Tara stayed close, ready to intervene if necessary. But as she watched Grace's careful patience, something miraculous began to happen. The runt, now named Leo, took his first tentative drink from Grace. His small body seemed to gain a little strength with each pull, and by the time the sun began to set, he was nestled snugly against his mother, no longer struggling to survive, but starting to thrive. "I think he's going to make it," Tara whispered to Grace, her voice full of wonder. "You did it, girl." As the night drew in, the shelter was quiet, except for the soft sounds of the puppies feeding. Grace lay peacefully on her side, her 6 puppies sprawled around her. But it was Leo who stayed closest, always nestled beside her, never far from his mother's protective warmth. In that moment, Grace's life was no longer defined by the pain of the barbed wire or the suffering she had endured. Now it was defined by this quiet, powerful bond between mother and son, a bond that, despite the odds, had survived and thrived. As the days passed, Grace and Leo's bond became the heart of the shelter. Volunteers and staff, who had initially been focused on Grace's recovery, found themselves captivated by the unbreakable connection between the mother and her smallest puppy. Grace, once a frightened, trapped dog, now radiated a calm and serene presence as she tended to her litter. But it was Leo, her tiny runt, who stole the show. Despite his size, Leo had a personality that shone through. He was determined, never giving up on nursing, and always pushing himself a little further, his tiny legs crawling closer to his mother each day. Grace would nudge him lovingly with her nose, guiding him back to her when he wobbled too far. The staff could see it. Something special was happening. Leo's survival wasn't just a testament to his strength, but also to Grace's unwavering love. She had refused to give up on him from the moment he was born. Even though the other puppies were thriving, Leo remained closest to her, always by her side. It wasn't long before people began hearing about Grace and Leo's story. Tara, who had stayed close to the duo throughout their recovery, shared videos and photos on social media. Within hours, their story began to spread. People from across the country were moved by the images of the mother's patient care and the tiny puppy's determined struggle. One video in particular went viral. It showed Grace gently licking Leo's face as he struggled to lift his tiny head, his body trembling with effort. The video captured the pure, raw emotion of the moment, a mother's devotion and a puppy's will to live. In the background, Grace's eyes were soft, her body relaxed, as if she understood that everything she had been through had led her to this moment of quiet peace. The story of Grace and Leo touched thousands. People sent messages of support, many sharing their own stories of animal rescue and the incredible bonds that form between animals and their caregivers. Donations poured in to support the shelter, allowing them to continue their work and provide better care for animals in need. Adoption applications flooded in, but there was one thing the shelter was certain of: Grace and Leo could never be separated. It wasn't just the bond between mother and son that moved people. It was the way that bond inspired hope. If a dog who had suffered so much could rise above her past, find strength in motherhood, and nurture her vulnerable pup, then maybe there was hope for all of us. As Grace and Leo's bond continued to captivate the hearts of people online, the small shelter found itself overwhelmed in the best possible way. What started as a routine rescue had turned into a viral sensation, and the shelter staff quickly realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The story of the brave dog and her runt wasn't just heartwarming, it was changing lives. The shelter's social media accounts were flooded with messages of support. People from all corners of the country, and even abroad, reached out to express their admiration for Grace and Leo's resilience. Some offered donations, others shared their own experiences of rescuing animals in need. It wasn't just about the shelter anymore, it was about the community it had formed around Grace and Leo. But the impact wasn't just emotional, it was also practical. With the increased attention came a surge of donations. People sent money, supplies, and even handmade dog blankets, all eager to contribute to the shelter's efforts. The influx of support meant that the shelter could expand its rescue operations, helping more animals in need. The staff worked tirelessly, and the facility, which had once been modest and struggling, now had the resources to take in more animals and provide them with better care. One morning, Tara stood in the shelter's small office, looking over the growing pile of adoption applications. The phones rang constantly, with people eager to meet Grace and her puppies, especially Leo. It was clear that the connection between Grace and her smallest pup had captured the hearts of many. But Tara knew they couldn't rush the process. Grace and Leo had been through so much already, and the bond they shared was not something to be taken lightly. "We're not letting them go until it's the right fit," Tara said, shaking her head as she glanced at her coworkers. "They've been through too much together." While the shelter worked through the flood of adoption requests, something else extraordinary happened. The local news station picked up the story. A reporter came to visit the shelter, filming Grace and Leo's daily interactions. The footage aired on local television, and soon the story made its way to larger news outlets. The emotional tale of the dog who had been found hanging from a fence and the pup who refused to give up was now inspiring people on a national level. The story touched more hearts than anyone had anticipated. People from all walks of life were moved by the courage and love that Grace and Leo represented. For many, the bond between the two animals became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light, love, and the possibility of healing. As the weeks passed, the shelter's small but devoted team began to prepare for a decision they knew was coming. The bond between Grace and Leo had become legendary, not only among the shelter staff but across the country. People had fallen in love with the duo, and they were eager to offer a safe and loving home. But despite the many offers, Tara and the team were adamant about one thing: Grace and Leo would only be placed with a family that understood the depth of their connection. After careful consideration, an adoption application arrived that seemed to tick all the boxes. The family, the Andersons, had years of experience with dogs, especially rescues. They lived on a peaceful farm a few hours outside the city, and they had heard Grace and Leo's story on the news. The Andersons didn't just want to adopt a dog. They wanted to offer Grace and Leo the calm, stable life they deserved. Tara and the shelter team set up a meeting. The moment Grace and Leo were introduced to the Andersons, it was clear the match was meant to be. The couple in their mid-40s had adopted several rescue animals over the years, and their calm demeanor instantly put Grace at ease. Leo, still small but full of curiosity, wagged his tail, eager to explore his new surroundings. "Look at him," Tara whispered to the Andersons as Leo tentatively approached them. "He's a little fighter, but he's got heart full of love." Grace, however, remained more reserved, sticking close to Leo and keeping a watchful eye on the new faces around her. Tara smiled. Grace had learned to trust again, but it would take time for her to feel fully at home in this new environment. The Andersons understood. They had experience with dogs who had experienced trauma, and they promised to give Grace the space she needed while always being there for her. The decision was made, and the following week, Grace and Leo were loaded into the Andersons' truck, ready to start their new life. The shelter staff, especially Tara, said their goodbyes with a mix of joy and sadness. Grace had been their beacon of hope, the symbol of resilience, and it was hard to imagine the shelter without her. As the truck drove off, Tara watched them go, wiping a tear from her eye. She knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both Grace and Leo, one where they could leave their painful past behind and embrace the love and care they had always deserved. At the farm, Grace and Leo found peace in the wide open spaces, surrounded by love and patience. Grace, once a dog trapped by fear and suffering, had found her freedom. And Leo, the small pup who had fought for his life, now had a family who would fight for him every day. Together, they had finally found home.